last episode of 2023, the Iamblichus reading group gets into the meat of the Immortalization Rite. In the process, we discuss vibrational aspects of the Nomina Barbara and Voces Magicae. We try out different theories of what they could possibly mean. We also discuss the Islamic and Sufi understandings of these issues. Ryan provides insight into his own praxis as we continue to explore what these rites mean for the modern day. Do we need a tradition to be initiated into before we can perform the rite, or can we self-initiate as some believe? Join Farjana, Ryan, and me as we discuss these questions and more on the December 22nd edition of the Iamblichus Reading Group. Hi everyone, welcome to the December 22nd Iamblichus Reading Group. We have Farjana and Ryan on, and maybe Matt will be joining us a little bit later. As is usual with this group, I'll go ahead and do a preliminary introduction, and then today we're going to try to get through the first prayer of the Immortalization Rite, also known as the Mithras Liturgy, and see how we can tackle some of those Nomina Barbara, and then also understand what is actually going on with that invocation. So in this episode, let's dig deeper into the Immortalization Rite. This is a religious rite of the Way of Hermes, a mystical congregation of Hellenistic Egyptian priests. According to historian Christian Bull, the rite has been turned into another rite seeking to invoke a cosmic god so as to elicit an oracle for the person performing the rite. As we began to conclude during last session's discussion, this is a really strange text with weird preparations and preliminary actions that Ryan and Matt think can be adapted to modern needs and requirements. These considerations lead me to seek answers to questions like the following. What is this text that describes the how and what of celestial ascent to higher realms? What is its purpose? Why should I enact its words and actions? Why should I or anyone else enact its words and actions? Though it actually fits the mold of many of the rites in the Greek Magical Papyri, the collection of magical rites which we now have for a modern audience, the Immortalization Rite's bizarre buzz of spoken sounds often defies meaning and sense. What is this rite blazing forth with holy nonsense, asking us to follow it into realms perhaps beyond even the far reaches of insanity? For scholars, the text, which we now know of as the Immortalization Rite, has numerous clues to its historical and cultural origins. But for those like us who want to actually use the rite, we need to know what purpose it can serve for us. We who stand beholden to technology and its mythologies that decimate beliefs and spawn bizarre delusions of its own. The rite assumes strange beliefs that form its life's blood and give it meaning. Can we, or should we, accept these beliefs to make the rite useful to us, or must we winnow out the useful from the useless? How much can we discard before it loses all meaning? Further, who are these gods stripped to bare bones, barely recognizable, compounded by nonsensical words? What is the meaning of this cacophony of nonsense, inviting us to cast aside the normal world of neat categories, comfortable truths, and the peace of home and hearth? These are the gods of nature, those that make human and other biological life a reality. In other similar rites of the Greek Magical Papyri, we might find more familiar divine names like Zeus, Hephaestus, Pan, or their Egyptian equivalents. But here we find gods without names, it seems. But this is misleading. Those bizarre words that sometimes have 100 characters and that we find incomprehensible often contain the names of the gods. But these names have been transmuted into a strange barrage of letters that look and sound meaningless, unless you have the key to decipher them. If Christian Bull is right, this rite is augmented to serve a different purpose than it would have served in the context of the Egyptian priests who followed the Way of Hermes. The magician and the scribes who passed down this rite, as we have it in the Greek Magical Papyri, at the hazard of betraying holy oaths and vows, have their own sense of the holy. The mystic who brings the rite to light from the embrace of a vow of silence also believes in the gods. He hears their call and bows to their demands. This magician's goal is more utilitarian than the Egyptian initiates of the Way of Hermes would ever consider, I think. Their interests were completely otherworldly. Their rite would lay the basis for an encounter with the gods who reside outside time and space, beyond the realm of the fixed stars. Their rite would make them gods, prepared by the vision of the rite to come back to the world of time and space and perform godlike actions. But what about our rite, the one we have from the Greek Magical Papyri? What does it have as its goal? And Christian Bull believes that the goal here, and it's pretty well laid out in the rite itself, it's the acquisition of an oracle. But what kind of oracle? What is an oracle? And why would I want to seek an oracle? Porphyry, who we know from our reading of Iamblichus, actually wrote a book, which is now lost, called The Philosophy of Oracles. In many respects, an oracle is not about future events. It is a bit of divine insight provided to me about my life and its place in the cosmos. You could think of it like the result of a tarot reading, but with much deeper cosmic implications for how my soul fares in the schemes of fate and destiny. So where do we start from? As the Iamblichus writes and the Kabbalist agrees, we must begin from that state and awareness of our nothingness. Don't we hear some of that nothingness in the address of the Magus, bequeathing the rite to his cherished child? In his awareness that he may be revealing holy truths, betrayed in thought and in ink, don't we hear the despair of nothingness from which all that is holy must rise? This is a cosmic necessity weighing on us, until we feel we must act, even knowing that we might be transgressing certain boundaries. We see this cry from nothing in the words invoking the primal depths and the eternal elements that comprise the body of the person making the invocation. This poor human asks that their body be regenerated and be reborn into something holy, so it may rise to the level of the gods and petition their help. With secret names and passwords on his tongue, the mystic inhales and expels the sacred breaths and begins the ascent through the realms where the gods test the mystic's mystical knowledge. So with this prelude, let's look at this rite and the first prayer of the rite. Did anyone want to have any intro comments?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch a little briefly before we began on, just like I always use the term operative force behind the nomina barbara, because like obviously that's the most striking thing I think the most people are going to see when they look at a text like this, or a lot of like PGM type stuff. And I will say
PGM being Papyri Greek Magici.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just so others know. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been doing a bit of reading over the past week, just kind of like thinking about this particular issue. And I honestly, I know I have my own like opinions on it, which we can definitely get into, but I mean, I don't claim to know the reality. And it seems like there are like kind of two major schools of thought, and especially a lot of like modern commentators on this sort of stuff. And the first, actually, and this is a one that, like, I'm going to be totally honest with you, I have a hard time with myself. This just isn't how I really practice. It's not really how I understand things. But just actually, for example, you always talk about the vibrational frequency, right? And the first kind of framework that I've seen a lot of is the idea that these sounds, and by intoning them in the correct way with the correct Greek translation, actually like hits on the correct vibrational frequencies of a particular deity or daimon or what have you. So there is a framework that the words themselves have power through the functionality of what language is, right? So like those specific vibrational frequencies that exist in the air, that being like what sound is, put us in the correct position to receive gods. And I would say that this probably is quite comparable to how someone might view an astrological approach to practice, where the specific energies present in the astrological setting are better accommodate for particular energies to manifest themselves. So that's kind of like the first one. Sorry, go ahead, guys.
No, sorry, I'm listening.
Yeah. So that's the first one that I've really seen. Second one actually is honestly much more in line with my own thinking, and that is that these names can really be thought of as like a sigilization, as an abstract kind of representation of deity, and by doing it in that like nonsensical, understandable, I guess, to an average person way, it allows that sigilization to manifest, and through that, that's where it comes from. So I just kind of wanted to talk about those two frameworks for viewing the nomina barbara, just because they are such an important and interesting part of these sorts of works. And yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it. Like I say, I very much lean more towards the second, where these abstract representations, allow us to draw power rather than create conditions in the material necessary. But yeah, love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Just jumping in.
Yeah, so I mean, I did read some of the PDFs, and again, I'm looking for kind of the commonalities, where I'm finding the links between these ancient mystic texts and Sufism. So when it talks about the sounds, the vowels, and is very much in line with the sounds and the frequencies we use in Sufism. So we use the divine names, which are attributed to the higher planes. But what's never done is that it's never divided. Like in these works, they call them gods. But in Islam, there's only one God. But there are different manifestations of that one God, and that's what the names represent. but they are the divine names. But the way that I'm kind of taking it is all of the divine names are different attributes of the one God. And maybe in these ancient mystic texts, when they talk about God, they're actually talking about the same thing. So they're not talking about separate gods, but maybe energies, or maybe to get in touch with a certain type of energy, you have to use a specific name. So that's what will link you to that. But it's never divided. In Islam, there is only one God. So that's why I keep referring back to the one that I love, because I always believe that it is only him that I'm contacting. And it is when I'm contacting him, I say him, but I mean the one God, then he will send my way that what I need, whether it be a higher spirit or one of the gods that they talk about. I don't actually know. So this is when I was reading about the vowels and the sounds. So this is where the Quran comes in. And I just wanted to say a few things about it, because I don't know if many people know this, but the Quran is actually the holy book of Islam. And it's actually a universal book that was inspired into the heart of Prophet Muhammad, which he then memorized instantaneously, and then he recited to his companions, so those that were around him. And the tradition of Islam, it was an oral language. So whatever was said was pretty much memorized, because they were quite illiterate. So they didn't read or write, but they were such good orators that everything that was said, they were able to memorize and recite back pretty much instantaneously. So because of this reason, it was never written down. So the vowels and the sounds were always passed on from one person to another. And that's how it was basically conveyed. And because of that reason is why we believe that it's one of the sacred books or the sacred texts that has been preserved. But Prophet Muhammad didn't bring this down just for the Muslims. He brought it down for all of mankind. So it's just something that I wanted to put out there for people that were kind of interested to know that this book is not just for me, it's for you, and it's for everybody else. So anybody that's attracted to it can literally spend a few weeks to learn the different letters and the sounds of the letters and be able to recite. It's actually really, really super easy to be able to recite this book and be able to say the sounds and the vowels and the string of the letters. It comes quite naturally to the tongue.
That's interesting. I think you would really be interested in August Ujdavinus's work. He's a Sufi as well, also. And
right.
yeah, he works with the, there were several strains of Islam at one time. They've went down to the Shiite and the Sunni, but there was also a very mystical Neoplatonic branch of Islam as well, and Avicenna, for example. And then also the Sufis broke off even a little bit differently than Avicenna's school. I'm reading a book right now called Avicenna's Angelic Liturgy, and what happened was that the Greek tradition was pretty much lost to Christendom because they were so fanatical in their bibliolatry, if you will. But the Arabs and the Islamic Arabs who took over were able to adapt the Greek traditions, which we're reading, Iambligus, as well as these texts, and we're able to adapt them to Islam as well.
So that's why.
He goes into August is very interesting because he takes Iambligus, he takes Plotinus, he takes Proclus and all of the Neoplatonics, and really does explain them for how they kind of fit into the Sufi, at least that branch of Sufism that he followed himself. It's really interesting. because he's
I
also able to incorporate the Egyptian, because that's
ah,
really what this is turning out to look like, is that there was an Egyptian mystical tradition,
uh-huh.
which our text, both this text that we're looking at here with the Immortalization Rite, as well as the Neoplatonic text that we have, those were actually probably, at least if some of the historians are right, grew out of this really interesting Egyptian mystical tradition called the Way of Hermes. And
Yeah.
August Ujdevinich is really interesting because he really saw that before a lot of this historical information has become available. I do like this notion of the resonance, and I think that that's right. I think that if if you've ever heard, I'm sure you have, but like Gregorian chant or Buddhist tantric chants, or Patrick Lank's chants of Gnostic texts, um, it really does, those vibrations of the music as well, really does put you into a state of, I think, of a higher awareness, or at least
Yeah,
wanting
that's it.
to.
I mean, if you look at it, really, I mean, all of these things, I mean, what they are doing is also changing the vibrational frequency of our DNA or our fluids of our body, all parts of it. And then that gets us pretty much in alignment, I would say, with the higher planes. Because I think it's easy to kind of sense that when we're in an area of that's pretty discordant or turbulent, we can sense it, we can feel it, we come out of the realm of peace. But then when we kind of get back in touch with it, we know we're in a place that is far more peaceful and much more calmer and happier and joy and love. I mean, and that's kind of the basic gist of when they talk about the sounds and the vowels, because that's what it
Mhm.
sounds like to me. So that's why I emphasize the Quran, because
Mm.
it has that. It has a very rhythmic um, tune to it. Like if anyone's ever recited it or heard it, I mean, you'd find that that's there. And some passages are much more like uplifting, and you can really kind of sense that and feel that. So that's why I just wanted to kind of mention that, because it's more of an area that I have more awareness of and more experience in.
And I think it's,
And
given the Islamic react or acceptance of these texts, which I find fascinating. I think that
yeah,
makes a
because
lot of sense, right?
because it makes, it kind of makes sense, because the truth, there is not just one truth, even if it points back to the universal truth, there are many different paths to it or ways to it. So I think that the more we come together because of that one goal is, I think, the point.
Well,
And
the
yeah, so
Neoplatonists would be considered a people of the book as well, because they
yeah,
did
of
have a
course.
written tradition as well as a
Yeah,
spoken
yeah,
tradition.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if many people know this, but in the Quran, God talks about the other book. He talks about the
Mhm.
Torah, he talks about the Injil, he talks about the Bible, he talks about the other sacred books. So they are all included, and it's not something that's separate to the rest of humanity. We're all kind of in it together. And
I
and
think
just
we're,
another interesting,
yeah.
sorry.
Well, no, go ahead. I wanted to talk about one aspect of that, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say this little bit about that, where the meaning of the word Quran comes from the root word, the letters qara'a, which are three separate letters. So they in the Islamic language, there's usually root words, and lots of words stem off of that. So the meaning of that, the root word, means to recite. So this book is about the recitation of the sounds, the letters, and the vowels, and the string of the sounds that come together in a particular configuration. So each word would be a configuration of those sounds. So it's always been about the frequency. It's always been about that. So we're working with the world of sound, which is above the earth plane. So we're working with the spiritual realm, right? Straight away.
It's really
And
interesting with the
yeah, and just
Kabbalistic tradition is so in sync with that as well. I mean,
yeah.
because it can be interpreted, depending, of course, with the way that there are the interpretations when you assign numbers to letters, you can actually reconfigure
Oh
certain
yeah.
passages, then actually equate them to other passages and say, well, because this passage of words or this series of words equals this number, then it will equal also this passage. So you can get really, really interesting
Yeah.
aspects
I did.
on meaning and stuff.
Yes, I did have a look at that. And this text that I just kind of went through, it did touch on a little bit of that. And the Arabic alphabet has that too. It's called the Abjad system, where each letter is assigned to a number. I don't really go into that because I'm more about the frequency. I'm more about the sense feeling of the letters and the sounds and how it kind of comes together and what it's doing for my being and my atmosphere and the rest of it. So I kind of don't delve into the numerological side of things. But I did want to say, just on this particular PDF that I was reading, it was In Praise of Nonsense by Patricia Cox Miller. And just on the first part of that, which is page 481, it says, "For I am the first and the last." And it goes on to say a few other things in that bit, which comes from Thunder, the Perfect Mind, Nagmadi Library. And that's
right.
That little part there, and that really intrigued me, because in the Quran, God says that. He says, "I am the first and the last, the manifest and the unseen, and He is the knower of all things," and that's in chapter 57, verse 3. So when I saw that, I referred back to Ibn Arabi's work, where he talks about the hierarchy, and what in the introduction there that you were giving, Jazz, you spoke about where you mentioned above the fixed stars. So it looks like we're kind of trying to reach for this level here, because that's above the sky of Saturn. So if I just tell you quickly how Ibn Arabi has written it in his book called Mystical Astrology, he's given this hierarchy, and he's given one of the highest skies is the sky of Saturn. Then he's given the sky of fixed stars, then the sphere without the stars, the sky of the zodiacal towers, and then the pedestal, the 2 feet. Then he gives a throne, then the form, then the universal body, then the immaterial primer, the universal nature, the guarded tablet, and then the first intellect, the pen. So that would be like the highest part of that threshold. Now, what's really interesting is that he also assigns a divine name to each of these levels, and the top part of that is the divine essence. So that's the uppermost threshold, I would say. So that's the divine name is the divine essence. In Arabic, that's al-Badi', and then it's the one who calls forth. Then it's the hidden, the last, and the manifest. So the God the God that is hidden, the God that is the last and the first, and the God that is manifest. And I would say that the first would equal the divine essence, so the uppermost threshold. So I just found that really interesting, because that's pretty much in line with what Ibn Arabi is saying. And if I kind of looked at it, and I'm kind of trying to understand, what is it that I'm describing? What is it that I'm trying to get in touch with? What is this field that I'm trying to break the boundary of this reality to reach? And I think the best kind of ever description I have ever heard is actually from David Icke, and he says that we're basically talking about all possibilities. How can something be the first and the last? How can something be manifest and hidden at the same time? So we're talking about all possibilities, all potentialities, which is really the human potential.
Right. Where all is possible.
Yeah, where all is possible.
And I think that from the Christian text that says, Jesus says, for God all things are possible. And I think what we find within the occult traditions, and again what we're seeing here is there are exoteric, which would be the non-occult traditions, and the esoteric, which are the occult traditions. And I think
Yeah.
what we see within Ibn Arabi and Ujdavinus, and especially this text that we're looking at here, these are part of an occult tradition, which at least it was believed at one time, also was in Islam as well. That
Yes.
there are things which are open for all to see, but because people tend to delude themselves, and they hide from themselves, and they hide the truth from themselves, there has to be an occult tradition where things are revealed if you're able to open yourself up to these truths and to these realities. And that's
Yeah,
what
and I think
I believe the occult traditions have in some way enabled us. They enable us to get back into that if we're open to it. I mean, we get lost in, at least I believe this, we get lost in the everyday stuff that just needs to be done. The work, the children, everything. All of that tends to hide what these other realities, which are still there, but they tend to hide them, and we tend to, and in the Neoplatonic text, as well as the Chaldean text, it talks about getting kind of carried away by materiality. And I'm not always so sure that they're talking about literally about what we touch and feel as much as they are talking about a state of consciousness. When they talk about materiality, they're talking about a state of consciousness which can envelop us and shield from us the true realities which these spiritual things are. But because we are somehow lost in the materiality, we have to really do a lot of searching to find what those other realities are.
That's it. So it's like a lot of distraction, like we're constantly distracted.
Especially in the modern world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like when I'm at work, it's like I'm sitting here at work. My job involves like sitting in front of a computer, and I'm continually bombarded with like distracting little messages of people trying to contact me, things coming in, email, doing this, all of that stuff. That's a continual state of distraction. And I think that can be extremely disorienting for anyone who would like to be looking, well, wait a minute, I need to concentrate. I need to focus. I need to be able to look for something which is beyond the distraction. If there is anything, maybe it's just a bunch of, the world is very chaotic in and of itself. And it is, and being distracted is just kind of a mirror reflection of the real nature of this material world that we live in.
Yeah. And it's like, well, what is it? What is within the occult that we're trying to get in touch with? And it's what you said in the introduction. It is our own personal oracle. And then you kind of think, well, why? So that I know the purpose of my life. Like, why am I here? What does God want from me? What does he want me to do? That kind of is what it seems like to me. So then when we get to a place of all possibilities, we will get in touch with the oracle that is trying to convey to us what it is that we have to do next.
God is speaking through the oracle in some way.
That's it, yeah, like
realities. That. You do the tarot, right? Am I right or no?
That's Ryan, I think.
I do the tarot, yeah.
Yes, you do the tarot, sorry. I thought you did as well, Farzana, sorry.
No. So then
that's an oracle, right? I mean, when I go through, for example, I do the tarot every now and then. Actually, I've gotten to the point where I just pull a card, and I think about both its negative and positive aspects, and try to understand what that is for me at this moment, and maybe for my earlier and my future life.
Yeah, so
But
it's like divination, like
yeah,
it's like a divination. So I guess this is the most, or one of the most direct ways of divination is through our own self. So instead of looking into the world for divination, we go through ourselves to get in touch with our own divine essence for the divination.
Actually, I'm gonna jump in there. I really like that point, and that to me, and like, so from what I'm gathering, back like looping it all back to the text, from what I'm gathering, it sounds like the both of you fall more on the camp of the nomina barbara, the words in and of themselves through the sound is what gives them power. Is that generally true?
not for
But
me
I
as much. I think it's part of the meaning of. I think it's part of what they are, but I also think that it's the semantic part of what
Right.
they are as well. Because it seems to me that at least for this text, and I believe for some of the Gnostic texts that we have as well, they act as passwords. You have to know this stuff in order to be able to ascend to the different levels.
yeah,
You will be confronted by a guard, if you will, a guarding god who will say, "Okay, do you know this?" And if you don't know it, then then you're in trouble, right? Who knows? I think of acid trips that go bad. Maybe you have a really
yeah,
bad, instead of having a good trip to ascent, you have a really bad ascent because your mind just starts going off in a crazy directions and begin obsessing about things that maybe otherwise you wouldn't. But so for me anyway, there's that element as well.
Yeah, I really like the idea of them as an anchor, maybe more than a key. You know what I mean? They're the thing that, like, maybe not an anchor. That's not the right. You know how, like, ships, they put weights at the bottom so they stand in the water. You know what I mean? That counterweight. Like, I think that maybe those words are the counterweight, which allows you to. Because I do, yes, the balance. Because, like, I do think that for me, it is much more on the semantic side. And I think that that's where we struggle in kind of assessing what, as like a modern person practicing these things, what they really do. Because I imagine part of the initiation in an ancient context, not an initiation, obviously, this is the initiation. Part of the preparation for the initiation would have been education, which would have involved you gaining, and I think that, again, this probably came a lot from like that self divination, and I think that that is really where we have to anchor our thoughts when we're looking at these ancient texts, because we don't have the privilege of being able to go to a teacher before the initiation to gain an understanding, kind of make what those words mean for us. So I think that, like, before we do anything like this, and as I've said last week, like, I do substitutes. I do substitutes for, again, because for me it is like a largely semantic part. It acts as that, and again, I always use the term, like, it acts as the sigil, which allows you to push yourself through these processes. So, like, yeah, I really like the idea of, like, that, like, kind of self divination for this, because I think it draws quite an effective middle line between those two ways of interpreting the words. It both recognizes that they are important in and of themselves, but it also does dictate that, like, we need to come to our own independent understandings of what these things mean for them to have any power. So yeah, I think that that's like a really critical concept especially if you're first reading this text. Like,
there's
I probably wouldn't ever.
There's a concept within occult, the esoteric circles or occult circles online anyway, talks about self-initiation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like the followers of Aleister Crowley, for example, the Thelemites, they talk about being able to self-initiate.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and I think that a huge part of what that would be is kind of defining your own dictionary of this stuff. And like some of it, I do think like with a little bit of study, if you can be like, just think about the things in a critical way, like you can probably come up with some of them themselves. Because like when we look at the words in the text, I see them generally as like two distinct types. There's your like vowel strings. So, you know, when we look in the first prayer, right off the bat, first origin of my origin. See, it's like even hard to do. A, E, I, O, U, A, O. We have those sorts of nomina barbara, but then going down to like the bottom of page 50, you see like metera, tot, yerezeth. Both of those things, I think you can, especially if you're like a little bit familiar with Greco-Egyptian magic more broadly, you can come to fairly conclusive answers as to like what some of these could represent. We know that the Greek vowels had planetary correspondences. We know that they had numerological correspondences. I know a lot of times, and this is coming from like some expanded reading, but like those more seemingly sensible names of gods will contain similar letters for either Greek or Egyptian constructions of a similar deity. So like, again, when we look at the bottom of page 50, both, I think it's like fairly, I think it is a safe assumption to make that when we're looking at a word like that, we can think about Thoth or I'm trying to think of another one. The example that's coming to my mind, and I don't even think that it's in this particular text, is it's like known that the term Erbet, which is very common throughout a lot of Greek magical papyri, has very heavy associations at the time with the underworld deity Ereshkigal. So like there are historical and logical you know, conclusions that you can come to. I'm not by any means saying you're like completely in the dark and you just you follow your heart, you know.
Right. We can find those. There's scholars have gone through and identified them. And we can read their work and get an idea of what those are. But there are some which don't have that type of semantic content. And I think that, you know, what, at least if Christian Bull's right, some of those were generated based on animal sounds, for example. And his hypothesis is that there were sacred baboons within the Egyptian temples. And they were sacred because baboons look at the rising sun, you know, and like as a group every morning. And then they would emit these sounds. And it's for a very famous in book or rite within the Greek Magical Papyri. He shows that, you know, it does literally equal if you think of it as a baboon and think of saying it as a baboon, it makes total sense. And why would those syllables be important? Because of the association to the sun, to the baboons who were considered sacred because they had a secret affinity, a secret occult affinity to the sun. So what they would be emitting, the sounds that they're emitting, would in some way relate to becoming one with the sun. So if we say those syllables as well, it will bring us in conjunction as well in some way with the sun.
Just sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you finish what you're saying.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I think that, like, even the idea of this, actually, I've never read that, but putting it in the context of animal sounds actually makes a hell of a lot of sense to me, especially, and again, when we look in the initiation rite itself, like the second nomina barbare we see.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Like that makes such a good amount of sense, and I actually think that those last three letters, PHR, we know again that probably is in response to Horus, or in relation to Horus, based on his ancient Egyptian name. Of course, Horus is associated with the eagle, and of course, I think that could definitely be construed as an eagle. You know what I mean? But yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So what? Let's read this. We were talking about it. We might as well get to it. So I'll do the first part. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to finishing off this little bit. Just what Ryan was saying about the cosmos. That was just another bit that I picked up on. And just before that, the first letter of Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic pretty much is the same letter. In Greek, it's alpha. In Hebrew, it's aleph, and in Arabic, it's alif. So that letter means all consciousness. So God. So that was another part that kind of was highlighted for me, and just about the vowels and the cosmos. This is what I read from that text. When it talks about the vowels, if the vowels offer direct insight into language, they also offer access to structural components of the cosmos itself. They're basically talking about the four elements in the body: fire, earth, water, and air. But then the alphabet, in the Greek alphabet, is made up of 12 letters that are the elements of heaven, and then the 24 elements of the cosmos. So then there are 24 letters in total in the Greek alphabet, and they are cosmic, and they form the exact double of the heavenly elements. So that saying of as above, so below, it kind of, matches that. But what's really interesting is that when I kind of see the correspondence to the Arabic language, this is in line with Arabic as well. But in Arabic, there are 28 letters, and they form the exact double of the 14 heavenly elemental letters in Arabic. And Ibn Arabi does talk about this. He calls them the 14 light letters and the 14 dark letters. So that's like a direct correspondence. But I see like the relationship there, and I see how it pretty much matches. So I just wanted to say that, because what I think is happening is when we do these rituals and the recitation and make the sounds and the vowels, what is happening, I think, is that it's changing the elemental makeup of our very being. So I think that what's happening is that the elements within our being are changing from a dense body to a light body. This is part of the process of the ritual. And then not just that, it affects the makeup of the cosmos, and therefore affects the heavenly bodies. So I think that we are the ones that influences all of creation. And I think that this is why man has, or a human being has, such a high status in creation. So I think that we look to the heavenly bodies and the gods and things, but I think that they look to us too. So it's a joint thing. It's not just a one-way thing.
That's really interesting because that's exactly what's going on in this first prayer, right? He's asking, or he or the person who wrote this, and of course, remembering that it goes back to probably the Egyptian way of Hermes. These Egyptian priests were asking that their bodies be changed so that they could then come in contact with these higher realities, right? These gods, which exist on a different plane, but they won't be able to be accepted by those gods unless they are changed. You call it their being, unless their being is changed. And he even says it. First origin of my origin. E, O, U, O. First beginning of my beginning. Spirit of spirit, the first of the spirit in me. Fire, God given for my mixture of the mixtures in me. So he's going through all of the elements that make up his body and his spirit.
Yeah,
So
which is very interesting because it seems like that's the point of the purification process. So as that's being done through these rituals, then there is a point that we come to, which is then ready for transcendence. And that's leaving all of these planes altogether before we die.
So he says, so the earth material, the first of the earthly material in me, U-E, U-O-E, a perfect body of me. And then it's interesting, he talks about, or he or she, where the NN is, that's supposed to be so, a perfect body of me, Chaz, whose mother is Joanne. It's interesting, of course, it's matriarchal, right? I mean, just as the Jews take their lineage from the mother, not the father. So this person is also saying, pointing to the matriarchal, the part of them is the most essential is what comes from the mother, which, because of its fashioning by a noble arm and an incorruptible right hand in a world without light, and yet radiant, without soul and yet alive with soul. I find this thing about the mothers also goes back to the beginning, where there's a tradition for this magical tradition within Egypt to be passed down from mother to male, male to female, female to male. Every generation is supposed to be the opposite of the transmission of the secrets. So it's very important. I don't think it's coincidental that he's writing to his daughter, and he's saying, here's this tradition which I'm passing down to you, my daughter, because that's the way that the tradition was passed down.
I also like the idea of sort of a more matrilineal, traditionally about the purification of the body and the changing of the body. In sort of like my forays, the feminine, the matriarchal, has always had sort of more materialistic implications, specifically due to its central role in the process of generation, right? You know, the masculine provides the energy which the feminine uses to create. And yeah, so it really implies to me that having that matrilineal connection really is reflected in a desire to affect the body, to affect the being, I guess. And I do think, based on that it would have a strictly material implication as well as a spiritual one.
Well, if you have a look at a lot of the chambers, where a lot of the mystics spent their time, they pretty much were like a cave, or it was a reminiscent of a womb. They were enclosed in a dark space where, you know, transformation can happen. And that's the idea of the alchemical flask as well, isn't it? Like it really does have that womb-like representation, because it is the womb where we enclose ourselves and transformation happens. So it would make a lot of sense. Yeah. And when you look at children, they like to go into the little caves and make their little teepees and their tents. It's because it's what makes them feel safe and like enclosed in love and safety. And that's where the changes can happen. It's done through love, right? So that would make sense. And a really interesting one of God's most highest names in the Islamic tradition is Rahman and Rahim, which is the most loving, merciful, and the most beneficent, merciful. And it comes from the root word of Rahama, which is the same root word for womb. So I think that feminine energy is very much sacred.
Well, you and Matt were talking about language, and language itself having its origin in, or somehow in the mother and the child.
Oh yeah, that was an interesting point.
And
Yeah.
then I mentioned the theory that I subscribe to about the that relationship, because it's an extended period in human life, right? The child can't, just in Darwinian terms, survival terms, the child can't survive without a mother's help and protection until they're about, well, sometimes maybe 8, 9, 10. So for that whole period, they are dependent upon the mother, which is unique among animals, right? Many animals, once they're born, they're ready to go.
Yeah.
I think humans and elephants, I think, are the ones that I recall that actually require some dependency of the young on the mother for protection. Sometimes they are actually protected from the father, right? Because the father will kill them if they're not of his.
Yes.
But so I think that's interesting that we're talking about a spiritual as well as or maybe turn it around, a physical as well as a spiritual transformation that's required in order to get in contact with these higher realms.
Even like moving on with the text, I think that theme's reflected through the whole next paragraph. I can take my hand at it. So now if it seems right to you, meta thoughts methartha fere in another place, irezerath, transfer me to the immortal birth and to next, to my underlying nature, in order that after the present and exceedingly pressing need, I may envision the immortal beginning with the immortal spirit. So again, we're having themes of a new birth into your immortal soul, the ability to capture your underlying nature. And I think that like a really important little thing to end it too is the beginning of the immortal spirit. Like all of these kind of have that like generative Genesis theme in it.
What do you think this exceedingly pressing need is? Morton Smith thinks it's refers to death. That he's asked the mystic is asking for some type of release because death is somehow, well, that's obviously the human condition, and that is what the exceedingly pressing need is, to somehow overcome that.
because you'd have to kind of give death to the parts that are holding on to this reality when it's not the real reality. So like an ego death, but it's like a continuous, a cyclical thing where you go through, let go of a part, and then go through again, let go of another part. And I guess it continues throughout life.
I see the pressing need at and I don't necessarily disagree that death is the implication here, because I think that death is probably the most commonly conceived of method to accomplish this. But I would say it's much more about like the pressing need to realize your true nature and ascend. The need comes from the soul's journey forward, and if we're going to take the idea that we are continuously moving forward, like I think that in a cosmic sense, then in a long time sense, the soul does need to move closer. And yeah, I mean, like death obviously, like I think is quite a symbolic and reasonable way of looking at this. But I don't think it's the only one, because again, we're talking about the spiritual and the physical throughout this whole text. So yeah, I think that like a physical death is most definitely like possibly part of that. But I also think that like initiation in and of itself, as you were saying, Farzana, is a process of killing the old to create the new, and to remake yourself so that pressing need can be served. So yeah, I don't necessarily disagree that it's talking about death. I just don't think that it's necessarily death as it is thought about broadly,
Yeah, but for me, it does sound like an ego death. Ego death. Yeah. That's like necessary for us to recognize our true nature, which, I guess is the only reason that death would come into this scenario. So it can't be an actual death, because then you don't have a chance, right? So that's why I'm thinking about the ego death, because it is an urgency, right? To recognize our true nature. I think that's why we're all here, right? That's what I think.
Right. Yeah.
So can I ask a question, Ryan? When you performed this, or when you enacted it, what did you do with all of the nomina barbara?
Well, again, I tried my best to determine what we are driving at. So, like, again, this requires a lot. This is probably actually the most work required beforehand. So, again, I look at, and then the reason that I brought this up earlier with the, like, kind of two ways of looking at the names is because that's kind of the framework that I approach it through. First, we're going to look at those vowel strings, assess what they mean and how they work together. So like that first string, for example, it reads to me as a journey through all the vowels, which again, in a Greek context, like had very significant implications. And again, paired with that phrase before, the first and the last, or first of my origin, beginning of my beginning, I think that really works well with this like intellectual framework of the first and the last moving through the vowels and their esoteric implications. Then when we move on to the more intelligible names of gods, as I was saying before, there are lots of them that I can come to some fairly well, constructed ideas as to who we're talking about, what we're getting at. But if I was unable to do that, and there are definitely times when like that is the case, like just looking here at, in 505 on page 51, Ancrest, I can't even pronounce it. Ancriptos You know, like that, I have a very hard time getting a sense of how that works in the ritual vis-a-vis the meaning of the word itself. So that, to me, is a very good place to do a substitution.
So so you are. I mean, I know you're kind of repeating what you've already said, but you're okay. I mean, you have to know what these mean before you say them. And number one, number two, do you practice them? And number three, are you happy or would you be okay with not understanding what they mean?
For me, like, because again, I'm really looking at these, if we're gonna like kind of break it down into a tool, quote unquote tool, an occult tool, I'm really looking at these as sigils. Just to like reiterate what that is, for like anyone listening at home, or if either of you guys need a refresher. Like a sigil it's a term from chaos magic that generally represents a symbolic representation of a truth or reality that then is forgot, and it's very unintuitive, but it is a big part of it. After doing some sort of an activation ritual, which places the association of that symbolic representation with its meaning in the above. And there's like lots of ways you can do sigil activations. They talk about everything from sex magic to prayer, you know, like it runs the gamut. And to me, they're like probably the most utilitarian tool I've come across in any sort of magical practice. So a key part of that framework of the idea of the sigil is, and you might not know exactly what it means, because again, a big part of it is the fire and forget aspect to it, but you have a sense of
this
what
is one theory of sigils.
Yeah. This is how I think about it. Yeah, this is how I think about it anyway.
Because there are other theories, right? I mean, it's like
certainly. Yeah, for sure. But this is based on like the chaos magic frameworks.
Right.
And you might not know exactly what it means, but you have a sense of what it's driving towards. And it's through that sense of what you're driving towards and its interaction with the unconscious, and ideally the sigil that has been seeded into the unconscious, that it really starts to work for stuff like this. So again, for me, it's like really important, and I'll go through and actually write down, and again, I usually don't necessarily write a word, you know, I'll do a correspondence chain again, you know, Mithras, to use an example, you know, what can that correspond to? Again, it probably has Mercurian sort of like implications because of its placement next to the pot. So again, what are some substitutions that we can use that have those mercurial implications, you know? And then it's just rinse and repeat. So for me, like, yeah, the kind of like having a sense of what you're driving towards is a critical aspect of it. But I do recognize
what did you use this rite for?
Well, I've actually used it a few times for different things. The first bunch was kind of as well, basically exactly what it says it is, you know, an initiation ritual to, and again, like I really like identify, especially like, you know, we talk about Helios Mithras at the start of the text, has the obvious solar implications, has the obvious, for me, kind of association with that holy guardian angel, agathodiamon. I actually like to call it like the thread, you know, that thing that pushes or that connects you right to the divine in your heart. So that's what I generally have used it for. Having said that, once I did it a couple times, and again,
well, That seems
when I
kind of
say
nebulous, though.
okay, good.
Well, what you just said seemed a bit nebulous to me. I mean, for me, it's like this says I can do this right, and then I can reach a God, or God will come down to me, and I can ask him a question. But you're saying that you do it, that's not your purpose. You're saying there's some other, and I'm sorry, I
I
apologize.
no,
It's not
go
clear to
ahead.
me
Yeah, no,
exactly.
actually,
It's
I
not
appreciate
exactly
you.
clear to me what
Appreciate you
you're
calling
doing
me.
it for.
Appreciate you calling me out on that, because and like this is honestly going to be a super unsatisfying answer, and I already know that. But like when it says you can ask the question of a god, and I kind of mentioned this last week, briefly. I think you got to look beyond the assumed meaning of what that is. And again, I understand that this is an unsatisfying answer, but like asking a question of the god for me really just looked like guidance. Like, how do I push my soul forward for ascension?
Sure.
I mean, again, like I'm sure if you have a specific question in mind, it can give you like similar results. I would just say if you're doing it that way, go into the ritual with that question kind of painting the entire working. Whereas I think that this, especially as an initiation, as that first contact, you, I think, are much better served to, again, like come at it from a more generalist perspective of like just guidance.
I
but
think
like,
that,
yeah, like for me to say like, did Mithras Helios come down into my apartment and sit on my couch and be like, "Hey Ryan, what do you want to know?" No, that's not how these things ever work in my experience.
right.
It's
But
much
I think
more
that's what I was
abstract.
getting at with the oracle, right? When I was saying that the oracle is really about how my life fits within the cosmos. What is the meaning of my life, and how is it fitting within this structure of fate and destiny? Whereas, it wouldn't be. I don't think I would perform this right just to say, should I buy this stock in the stock market? That's all.
Yeah. And I
And
mean,
also,
like,
I'm a little bit confused by your use of initiation. For me,
well,
initiation is something that should have preceded this rite, and it was a totally different rite where you were initiated into a practice, into a tradition, if you will, and then you do this rite. You've already been initiated. Then and because you've been initiated, you have been given the the right to go ahead and then perform other rites.
yeah. I honestly use the word initiation because it's in the text, but like,
Well,
I actually like am rather ambivalent toward the concept of initiation. I mean, like, I would say that you need to have an understanding, especially of like what you're looking for, because as I said, like, and like, that's not to say, and I've like said this, I've talked to you guys about this before. That's not to say I have not had like audio visual, like very real in a material sense experiences with magic, but like that is frankly not generally my sort of experience, So I think that like initiation for me, a lot of it just is like, okay, and it's like any skill really. The basics of how everything works. You have experience contacting the above, and you understand like what you are looking for in these rituals. That's where initiation comes from for me. Like, I would never like say, hey, new occultist, new theurgist who's just popping into this, you should just try the Mithraic initiation because that's going to be the best way for you to get into contact with things. Like, no, I think that the Mithraic, or this immortalization rite that we're working with, is very powerful and shows very powerful like guidance. Like I said, it has capacity for that, but it does, like, it is complex. So that is the bottom line. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't think that doing this as an initiation as such, as it's kind of thought about broadly, makes a lot of sense, at least to me. Now again, like, do your thing. If you're listening to this and you're like, hey, F you, Ryan, I haven't done a single ritual before and I really want to try this. Like, hey, be my guest. If it works for you, that's great. But like, it's important to know, and I always use the term, I've used it today and you've heard me, you may use it like 1,000 times. You have to understand the operative forces and you have to understand how they interact with each other. If you do that, hey, do your thing. You know what I mean? But like, I just have never like identified very strongly with this initiatory framework in the sense that like before you can practice, you need to contact XYZ through XYZ ritual. It just doesn't resonate with me, you know?
I see what you're saying. I mean, it does say for an initiate of this our power. So it seems that they're saying it's someone who's already been initiated, such as his daughters, they've already gone through. But I think that it's important. I mean, I like the idea of self-initiation, right? Because obviously we don't have any tradition anymore, or if there is, they're hiding, and so not all of us are lucky enough to become friends or, you know, meet someone who is an initiate and can initiate me. But I think there could be dangers to just performing something out of the blue. But I don't know. I mean, I've never.
No,
The only analogy I have is like taking LSD and not really being prepared for it in some way.
Well, I mean, you're definitely right to that. And like I've told you guys plenty of times, like I have had bad experiences, and a lot of those bad experiences happened at the start of my journey. You know what I mean? When I didn't really understand what I was dealing with. So like, do I think it would be valuable if like, yeah, like I would, oh God, if I could have studied at some sort of, you know, Platonic temple from the age of 15 and then worked my way through like various levels of understanding prior to jumping in, yeah, that would be great. But we don't have those tools, and I don't see them coming anytime soon, you know?
Well, there are some. There's like, for example, there's a Hermetic group that has contacted me, and they do. I haven't followed up on it, but they charge, of course. You know, there's a certain series of courses that you can take to be initiated and things like that. But we're getting out to the end of this, and I apologize if it seems like I'm asking pointed questions, but I think some of these things are important. For me, what is the reason, though? Why would I want to get to know what my place is in the universe and in the cosmos? Because
to that pressing need, for me at least.
But what, okay, so let's say I get that. What is this going to do? And I'm just going to throw this out there without any preparation or anything. But I've been thinking about this for a while because of certain clues within Iamblichus and then in some other writings. What this does, and what being able to be initiated into these rites and performing these rites does, is somehow allow you to short circuit what your fate was or your destiny was, so that you can begin to become in control of your fate and your destiny. And so there is a sense of power here, and that power is to have control over your life in its cosmic sense as well as its material sense, to where you will not you will somehow get out. And I think, Farzana, you said this like almost, I think, one of the first sessions that we had, which was you get out of the cycle of rebirth, death and rebirth in some way. And you begin to have a bigger consciousness of your life and your ability to control your life in some way, so that you don't,
come back here again.
well, they
That would
do
have
want
been
to come,
what
but
do
the
I-
thing is, they do want to come back here, right? I mean, at least for the Neoplatonists, they do want to come back and they want to be able to teach people.
Right. I mean, I don't know, like maybe they do. Maybe they've reached a level where, they can face anything, but for me it's like I don't ever want to come back. I've had
Has it
enough
been
of this
that bad?
place.
Has it been that bad for Joanna?
I think it's been that long. Yeah. I
Yeah.
do feel like it's been many eons. Maybe that's how I feel. I don't know.
Well, like I said, I was just going to throw that out there. Maybe we can put that into further perspective next time when we meet.
Yeah.
If
I also
it's
feel
okay,
like
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I also feel like just finishing off from what you were saying is that it kind of I think it opens up also access points for our greater potential in certain areas to why we are here at this time. So if it's fulfilled or if it's done to a certain degree or in a certain way, that then we've fulfilled our purpose
Mhm.
and that's enough, right? So I think maybe for a lot of us, we want meaning to our existence, and to know why we're here and what we have to do will give us a sense of that. I feel that for myself. It comes to a point where you ask the question, well, what do I do now? Like, why am I here? What does God want from me? And then you kind of look down that path and find out, why is it that I have a set of talents or abilities or gifts, I call them gifts, and someone else has a different set? Clearly I should be using them and I should do something with them. And I think that's another part of it. And I wanted to ask a quick question about the initiation. Like, do you think that happens naturally throughout our lives? I mean, what I mean by that is, when I was 15 or 20, I didn't feel a need to look at this path. But then as I got older, that happened and it happened naturally. So do you think that the initiations happen naturally for some people without having to go through anything? Without any, what I mean is without doing a conscious ritual. That's what I mean.
I think so. I mean, I've used the analogy a lot of sports and art, where some people just have that in them. You know what I mean? Like, some people are just naturally excellent athletes, and that's just how they are. I think that some people are naturally spiritually gifted, and, they can use that to, push themselves forward without any sort of external help. And I don't think that you need to be a born sage for this to happen to you. I think you just need to immerse yourself in it. Because so much of this is impossible to put into words. But there have been a lot of times, and I'd say a lot of my more profound revelations have come about just in life through life. I don't know how else to describe it, through my own journey.
Yeah.
So yeah. And that's why I think that some of these initiations really are kind of like a jetpack on that, on an already natural process.
Yeah, and I feel like, when like what you said about sports and arts, I feel like that's different. I feel like, when it comes to things in the world, there are people that are naturally good at this and that, but is very different to the spiritual path. I find the spiritual path to be completely different to anything that I've ever experienced ever. Like someone, they said about, it's a bit like learning and like riding a bike. And I said, no, it's not. It's completely different to learn how to drive a car or ride a bike. That's easy. That's easy compared to this stuff. And even if I wanted to become an artist, maybe I could take some lessons. I may not be a great one, but I can still become one. But to become enlightened and to purify the soul and transcend, that's on a completely different level. Like, this is hard.
Yeah.
So I tend not to find anything comparable to it. I don't. Yeah, that's just my take. Like,
No,
I don't find
I definitely see what you're saying to that.
Conversation. And
I think that it's like.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry,
this
is
I
great.
We're at the end.
But can we? Yeah. Well, I apologize, but like.
No, don't worry. You're good.
I mean, I think we can take this up next time, right?
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely. But
just don't forget,
the journey to God is unlike anything. Like it just is. And I
my parting thought, and with this is like a respectful pushback. I would say that the journey towards God, for me at least, is like all things, which I know is a facetious way of saying it, but yeah, no,
I do understand what you're saying, and I'm not saying that everything that you do in life doesn't point you back to God. Absolutely. Like if I'm doing my washing and I'm conscious of doing my washing up, then yeah, that action has, it goes back to God. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about purifying the soul and transcending from this body back to our light body. That is something else. That's my take on it.
It definitely is. But yeah, like we'd love to take this one up next time because I think this is a good conversation.
Let's start exactly where we just left off, because I'm gonna withhold my opinion one way or the other. It's a great place to stop, and because it ends with a question and also a very strong assertion, which I really, really like, because it's a strongly held belief, which is very important as well. But just, I think, for time's sake, if we can take this up next time, I think that'll be great.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, and Merry Christmas, I hope you all have an excellent holiday, and we'll talk next time.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
That's it for the Iamblichus reading group in 2023. This was an intense session, and we began to break through to the other side, as Jim Morrison famously said. To die and be reborn is an arduous process, fraught with dangers, spiritual and material. We left that insight hanging in the air, and in 2024, we will begin to taste the sweetness of its truth. Join us in 2 weeks as the Iamblichus reading group continues its search for occult meaning and esoteric enlightenment. Happy holidays, and have a great start to the new year. Thanks for joining.